Okay, hi everyone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through this first Touchdesigner file we looked at in class that was driving the robot arm. And I'm going to delete a whole bunch of it and we'll basically just rebuild this. First of all, to show you how it works. And then maybe I'll do one more where we'll build something new. Okay, so I'm going to give you this file because there's some things that you don't really need to change. And as we mentioned in class, these networks, very much like a network in Grasshopper or a shader in Blender or a Blender geometry nodes, they all read from the left side to the right side. So here, if I use my right mouse button to select, all of these are kind of our inputs here, and on the right hand side these are our outputs. And if we go all the way to the end, this thing here, OSC out, if I click on it and I press the letter P for Peter, it brings up what's called the parameter window, and that is basically like the settings for these nodes. And if we look at the last one that's called OSC out, it's sending three coordinates to the robot, and it's sending them over this network port address, which is the same address that our Python script uses. So we're not going to change any of that. We're just going to change what sort of numbers go in. The other thing that I want you to look at before we start is what we call like the magnitude of these numbers, like what size they are. So if we look at, I've actually made some notes in the file up here. Maybe I'll just make this a little bit smaller and I'll bring it down to where we're looking. I made notes of what kind of the range of our robot is, because it's kind of useful and important to know. Let's just compare it to this OSC. So up here is the controllers. It says horizontal movement, 1 to stop, 2 to start, blah, blah, blah. And down here I've written the ranges. So if you look at the side to side, I've just given them kind of common sense names to match the axis. Side to side is this translate Y, and it's going pretty much from positive 300, negative 300 to positive 300. And that's basically because when I tested it with the robot, the numbers that the OSC corresponds to what the actual robot does is about minus 300 to, I think, 350. Forwards and backwards. In this case, because I just mapped these W and S keys to this translate X, what I've done is I've actually just found the middle point where I want the robot to start, which was the number 420. And then all I'm doing, if you look at this translate X, when I press the W key, it's adding 10 digits to that. And if I press the S key, it's removing 10. And if I press X, it sets it back to 420. And then with the up and down, I've set a range of 200 is like up, like the brush's neutral position, and about 20 is down. So I used Q and A to send this down. So A is sending it down. And if we look at that number there, now it's like minus 30. If I press Q a few times, I'm adding 10. That's 0. So we'd have to check this in the robotics lab. And, it would depend exactly where we put the brush and the brush holder. So, 0 might be when it's touching, or when it's touching on this visualizer, it looks more like 20. But then when I press Z to reset that, I've set it back up to 200. So these numbers are really important because obviously if we put numbers that are outside this range, either the robot will go out of range and turn itself off, or even worse, it might hit the table or something like that, which we don't want. So that's why I've written down the numbers here, just so that whatever we make, if it's doing something really crazy, you can have a look at these numbers and say, okay, well, what am I sending it, and what should I be sending it? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're basically just going to kind of rebuild what's here, if I can remember exactly how to build it. It's got a few different steps, but basically what we want is we're going to have, as we spoke about in class, this LFO, which is just the low frequency oscillator, sending it side to side. And then we've got keys that are just adding or minusing, 10, from the height or 10 from the forwards and backwards. So let's give this a shot. So with my left mouse button, first of all, you can pan around the network. If you zoom in and out, if you zoom in, you'll get closer. If you keep zooming in, some of these you can actually go further inside of. So for example, if I zoom out, you might find yourself in another place, like here. This one here that's called, it's got a legacy name we don't really need. Maybe I'll call this robot control. Bit of a better name. Now if we zoom into robot control, this is where all our stuff is. So that's just kind of part of the way that Touchdesigner allows us to look through things. But let's just get started, and I think as we work, hopefully you'll start to pick it up. So with my right mouse button, I'm just going to drag and select, and I'm going to pretty much delete everything before that merge, which is where we're taking our data out. So everything on this side, just leave it there. So I've selected it, and I'm just going to press delete. So now we've got our table is still there. The brush is just sort of randomly in space. Okay, so now we're going to start adding some things back into our network, and we'll start to rebuild something like what I had before. So first of all, if I double click with my left mouse, I'll bring up this create dialog, and we're going to be working in this green space, which is chop or channel operators. And I'm going to grab the LFO, which is the low frequency oscillator, and then we've got our numbers going in up and down. At the moment it's going in kind of fast, but we can fix that later because we're not connected to the robot, so it doesn't really matter if we do anything kind of stupid here. Okay, so then I'll double click again, and I'm going to bring up a null, which is here. Left click and left click. And now if I left click from this little point in the middle to this little point here, I can join them together. The reason we use a null, it just makes it more convenient. So if I connect the null to here, here's our signal going in. At the moment, we're not getting anything into our brush yet, but I'll come back to that. But what's nice about this is that now we can just start to sort of work in this space here without affecting, what operator this connects here. And sometimes that's important for some names and how things read. So we're not going to go too deep into kind of the theory of how Touchdesigner works, but just make a mental note that it's always good to have a null before you sort of start doing something different with your data. So in the middle here, we're going to add one more operator, and we can also just hover our mouse over this line, right click and say insert operator. Another way to add something in, and this time I'm going to make a rename here. Click and grab that, and then we're going to rename it from, and I'm just going to click the drop down here from channel 1, and we're going to call this one Translate X. Okay, and the reason we call it Translate X is that in our network, that's what our network is looking for. It's looking for this these names, and that's what we're going to be giving the robot. So this renaming thing, it's really just how our robot connects to the script. And if we look down here in our visualizer, we can actually see that now that we've got something called Translate X, we've got a number going in there. This stuff down here, this purple and blue stuff, that's just what we see on the screen. But because I had some stuff there connected before, we can see that in these two that are red, it's looking for Translate Y and Translate Z. So we're just going to add them in. At the moment, we can just pretty much, I'm just going to right click, drag here, and then copy, Command C, Command V. I'll just hit that twice, and I'm literally just going to use these exact same things and change this one to Y and this one to Z. And once we connect these up, now we've got our brush moving. Of course, it's not moving in any useful way, but at least everything's connected now. But what we've got at the moment is these numbers moving up and down, and the brush, I don't know if you can see it, it's doing this tiny little movement there. So what we need to start doing is transforming that tiny little movement into the movement that we want to see. So if you remember, we had these ranges up here. So first of all, let's have a look at the side to side, the translate Y, and let's make that minus 300 to 350. And that should make the brush now go back and forth. So I think my Y was here. I'm just going to move it up the top so I'm sort of doing them in the correct order. So between our LFO and our rename, I'm going to right click on the little connection, insert an operator, and I'm going to insert math, M-A-T-H, put this here, and if we look at the range of this LFO at the moment, if we're looking close, you can just see these numbers. It's going between -1 and 1. All I'm going to do is go into the range of the math, and I'm going to say, this is just a little bit of logic, from a range of -1 to 1, I want you to make this a range of, what did we say? -300 to 350. Okay, so they're the numbers we were using before. So hopefully that's still correct for our robot. The table, this is where we need to get back to some real world testing. My table might not be in the perfect position on this network. So actually what we'd probably do in class is do some slower testing and see whether this virtual table actually matches what we've got in the real world. So there are ways that we can improve this network based on these initial drafts of mine. Okay, so now we've got our backwards and forwards movement going, and you can see it's, we haven't had to do much. We've just got this LFO, the math to turn it to the right range, changing its name to translate Y, sticking it into a null, which does nothing, and popping it into this merge, which is sending it out not only to our robot, but to our visualization thing. So basically what you can do is really think of this network as everything on the left-hand side of the merge. This stuff I've made for you, and you can just leave it there. Okay, so first of all, as we said, this movement might be too fast for the robot. So if I go to the LFO and I go to the frequency, I can turn this to 0.1, hit enter, and all of a sudden we've got something much, much slower. It's still the same set of numbers, just oscillating at a lower frequency. I'll put this to 0.2, something like that. That's totally fine. Okay, so the next thing is, I just copied and pasted these low frequency oscillators here just so there was some numbers going in. But we want to make this kind of up and down and forwards and backwards like we had before. So instead of an LFO, I'm going to double click my left mouse and I'm going to grab a constant. And these things are named in a pretty careful way. A constant is just a fixed number. It's a number that doesn't change. So if I just go here and put in the number like 50, then we've got a value of 50. So unlike the LFO, which is continually changing, this 50, it just stays at 50. So now if I delete this LFO here and I connect in this constant, we'll just have a value of 50. And now that's going into our translate X, so that should be moving it forwards and backwards this way. So if I make that 50, let's say like 150, we can see that we've moved our brush back. And so now if I make this like, I don't know, minus 150, we've moved further back. Okay, let me just check my notes. Where was our neutral point? Maybe I'm not thinking correctly here. Okay, so on X, translate X, okay, 420 is the starting position. So 420 is the middle. So let's put 420 here. Oh, that's 720. 420, enter. Okay, so now we're in the middle. So now if I make that like 450, yep, we come forwards. If I make that like 600, we come even further forwards. And now if I drag that back, yeah, okay. So this slide is not being very helpful. We'll just type our numbers here. So we had 420, and if I change that to like 220, yeah, okay, nice. So I'll just leave that at 420. The reason I've left it at 420 is that I want our sort of original number to be kind of our, in this case, our like middle point, the middle of our table as far as our visualizer here is predicting it. I'm just going to make some more space here. I just did that by right click to click and drag, and then left click to move these around. Okay, so now let's add something so that we can change this number. So this is where we start to add our keyboard controls. And if you think back to the original network we had before, it had a whole lot more things. That was just the keyboard controls. I'll show you what I mean. If I just really quickly get rid of this LFO, left click, delete, left click on this constant, and then copy and paste, Control C, Control V, chuck this in here, so we're too high, but let me just complete it so you know what I mean. Up and down, I've said 200 is up and 20 is down, so if I put 200 into this constant, that's up, and if I put that to 20, that's down. So basically, already, we can control the whole thing. It's just we don't have any keys mapped to it. I mean, technically, you could actually just sit in Touchdesigner changing these numbers, but I think it's much better to have something that's got a little bit more of a user interface, especially to avoid us doing a typo. Like if I accidentally put in -200, the brush would go through the floor and we'd probably slam the robot into the table. So that's why I'm going to put in some keyboard controls. Okay, so first of all, maybe we'll start with the up and down here, because that's safety-wise one of our most important ones. So first of all, I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to find the chop called keyboard in, and that's basically just allowing us to use the keyboard as a controller. So I'm going to use the keys that are just kind of convenient on my keyboard, and so I'm going to use for up and down. I can't remember what we had before. We were using W and S and Q and A. Let's try Q and A. So we'll go Q space A. I'll just hit enter. So now if I press the keys Q and A unfortunately is also a keyboard shortcut for activating this chop, but we can still see the Q and A are firing. So maybe we can choose a better key later, but I'm just going to keep it simple because I know where it is on my keyboard. Okay, so there's our Q and A. So what we need to do is we need to turn these into something that affects this constant. Okay, so I've got my keyboard in with my Q and my Q and my A, and then I just got to make sure that when I'm pressing A, I'm also toggling this to active. So if it looks like this and you can select the little chops here, just press A again, and or this little button here, just so you can see the connector on the right hand side, so it's not active. Okay, so from here I'm going to add a count, and I'm just doing that by I've put my middle mouse button here and I've clicked, and that, you know, if I do that, if I middle mouse here and then go to count and then left click, I've got my count, or I can simply just double click, find my count, and then manually connect them together. It's the same thing. I've connected it into that top slot there. So now if I press Q and A, it's counting how many times I've pressed it, which is exactly what we want. Okay. And then we're also going to need to be able to reset that count. Maybe we'll put that in now, because as soon as we keep playing with this, we're going to end up with some weird values here. So there's this reset button here, and I can just click it, but we can also set that to a button of its own. And now I'm just going to copy and paste this, copy, paste. So now I've got another keyboard in. I'll delete these Q and A, and this is where I'm going to press Z. So now this one is just getting my Z button. And if I go into my count, what I want to do is I want to connect the Z button to this reset switch. So what I can do is, in the keyboard in here, I click this little viewer active button here, which means I can actually click and drag this channel. So now I'll go onto my count chop, and I'm going to click and drag this onto the reset button and just say export chop should be fine. So now if I press Q a bunch of times and A a bunch of times, and then I press Z, it resets my count. So that's great, that's ready to go. And we're going to use this to affect the let's start with the height of our brush. So what we need to do is we need to turn this counting into usable numbers. So first of all, I'm going to just I'll just create a chop called a select chop, and I'm just going to select the channel name of, oh, I have to, sorry, connect it to my count, and I'm just going to grab channel Q, key number Q, and then I'll do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy and paste that, and I'm going to change that one, delete that, and just grab this little thing here and press A. So now this one is just looking at the Q button, and this one is just looking at the A button. That's nice, so it's counting them both. And I'm just going to right click, drag, move these across to make a little bit more space. What I'm going to do now is if I connect this now to a null, let's pop a null here. And now which one were we looking at? We're looking at our translate Z, I think that's what we wanted to play with. So we're playing with the bottom one here. If I connect that to a null, what I'm kind of looking at doing is I want to add some number to this constant that then goes into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a math chop. So I'm just I just double clicked my left mouse, math, pop that there, and what this math is going to do, I want to add this one and this one together here, and then I'm going to put the math chop into here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to disconnect this, going to put the math chop here, going to put this here, and both of these in there, and on the math chop I'm going to combine chops and add. So now what that's doing, see how that number is now 204. If I keep pressing Q, it's just adding 1 every time. It's perfect. The only issue is that 1, if we look at the brush, it's not moving it very far. So I'm going to add in another math here. I'll right click on my connection, insert operator, add a math, drop it in there, and here I'm going to multiply this by 10. So now I'll just reset that because the brush has gone off the screen. I'll reset our count here by pressing Z. So our count's back here, we can see the brush again. So now if I press Q, where are we? Here, now that 1 has become a 10, and that null's just being a null. Sending it to the math, and now we're 210, 220, 230, 240, and so on. So how do we make it go down? Well, we just do the exact same thing. We just want this one to be minus 10. So I will middle mouse click here, just chuck in a null, and I'm going to add in my math here, insert operator, add math, and I'll go into my multiply in the multi-add tab here, and I'll type minus 10. So now if I connect this also into that math, what we should have is if I press A, we're minusing 10 from that number, and Q, we're adding 10 back, and Z, we're resetting it. So that's done. So we've completely fixed our keyboard input here through this little system of chops. And I know this stuff might feel a bit complicated at the beginning, but what I hope is that this sort of logic of thinking, the more you do it, what I like about Touchdesigner is that once you understand the way of thinking, you can get better at making networks like this without necessarily having to know exactly how to write the code. Here we're just kind of stringing together these operations to get this to do what we want it to do. So now that we've got Q and A for up and down here, we're just going to use the exact same thing to make our forwards and backwards, and then we're pretty much done. I could just copy and paste this, but I'm just going to remake it just because I think a friend of mine he enforced this technique on me, and I think it's a good one. When you're learning new software, learning to code, too much copy and pasting, it means that you don't necessarily learn the important stuff early. So let's just quickly make this again, and it should reinforce how we did it. So let's start again with a keyboard in. I'll left double click. I'm just going to type in key to help find keyboard in. Okay, this time in the keys, I'm going to type W and S with a space in between. Hit enter. Now, if you don't see this, remember right at the beginning I said just press P for parameter window, and that just brings up the settings for each node. Okay, so then let's go to a, I'm just going to middle mouse click here. Let's go to a count. And then let's put in a keyboard chop again to reset our count. Keyboard in, and we'll make this one X, and we will set this to active using the little viewer active toggle here. Click on the count, and in the count tab here we're going to drag this X onto the reset and just export chop. Okay, so now if we press W and S, we're counting the numbers here, and X to reset. Perfect. The X button also is a keyboard shortcut. If I press X, it's actually toggling on and off these little arrows which show us that we've made a data connection here. So, you know, they're not the perfect keys to pick, but okay, that's something we can look at when we're a little bit more advanced. Okay, so now I need to get our select so we can select which key we want. So I'll just middle mouse click here, type in SELE, there's our select, do it again, SELE, there's our other select. We'll make the top one W, so I'll just go for the channel names, grab the W, into the other select, let's grab the channel name and call this KS, and we will, I'll just grab a null to put our numbers out to, and another one, null, just drag these here, and then we just need to do our multiplication so that instead of being just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blah, 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 it's 10, 20, 30, 40. So I'll just right click on this connection, insert an operator, add a math, left click, go to the range, go to the multi-add, and I'll just make this first one 10, and I'll add another one here, right click, insert operator, math, left click to lay it down, multi-add, and I'll just make this one -10. Okay, so now we've got these two numbers going up or going down, and then let's just make a little bit more space. I'll right click to drag, left click, right click to select, left click to drag, and we're going to need to add that math in, so double click, here's our math. I'll disconnect this by right click, disconnect, put the math into the rename, and then I'll go put the constant in, as well as, I'll just put these all side by side, as well as these two nulls, so dragging them all in, connecting them all up, and then on this math we're going to combine chops and add them all together. So now if I press W, we're making the number bigger, S, we're making the number smaller, as well as another shortcut that's just changing the curve or straightness of our connection lines, and X to reset it to 420. Okay, so now we've got control over our brush down. I'm pressing A here, and also our brush backwards for S and forwards for W. Let's see if I can get it all the way in front of the table. And then X to reset that position, Z to reset the height. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is let's add in a keyboard control for the left and right motion. So that's going to be a tiny bit different. So let's just see how we go with that. So what I had before was I had a keyboard in, keyboard in, and I had the keys 1, 2, and 3. And I used, I think, I don't know, like 1 to start, 2 to stop, 3 to reset it. Okay, so what we need in this case is slightly different. We're not counting the number of keys, we're just using them like to change a setting. So we'll use a slightly different bit of logic. Here I'm going to right click on the connection and look for logic. Logic, pop that here, and I have to set that to radio button. So now we can see that it's just set to whichever key I pressed last. Okay, and now I'm going to middle mouse click on the connection node again and put in fan. And fan, if I put that to fan in, that will just give us whichever number we have selected. So it'll actually make 1 is going to be 0, 2 is going to be 1, and 3 is going to be 2, just because I think our first integer has to be 1. I'll just pop that out to a null, so we know where we're up to. Okay, and then now I'm going to add this to a switch. So I'll middle mouse click here, switch. Okay, so what we've got now from this switch is if I go 0, 1, 2, we're setting 3 different values. I'm not sure I really need that switch. The fan might be doing the same thing, but that's just how I did it before. Okay, so now looking at our LFO, what we're going to do first of all is we're going to have the ability to play the LFO. And actually, I've just realized one thing we don't need here, we don't need the 3, because we just want 2 states. We want to be able to turn the LFO on and off. So we just want 0 and 1 for these 2 values. And that is what our switch is going to get. And now I'm just going to set my null to active, and I'm also just going to drag this index here, and I can either export chop or chop reference. In this case is fine. Chop reference is nice because we can see what it's doing, and we can also delete it if we need to. Okay, so what we've got here on our switch is this index is going up and down, and our switch is either on or off. Off is 0, on is 1. So now what I'm going to do is, to this LFO, I'm going to put my switch here onto the play button, because if I just press play here, off and on, it will turn the LFO off and on. And so I'm just going to drag that switch onto the play, export chop reference is fine. So now if I press 2, we play, 1, we stop. Okay, so now we've got our stop and start, which is great. The last thing we need is we're going to put a button in here to reset. So that's where we're going to put that number 3. So I'm just going to double click here and just grab another keyboard in, and I think I can even just do a little sneaky and just literally drag the keyboard in onto that reset. But maybe I should even just put a null there just to be tidy. So I'll go into my LFO, activate my null, drag it onto our reset, chop reference. So now if I press the number, I'm going to change this to 3. Nope. I might just have to redo that export. I might have just screwed that up a little bit. Let's try the chop reference now. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so when I changed the 3, this K3 was probably K1 before, and it just confused a Touchdesigner. So I just re-exported that. That should be fine. So now let's see what happens. If I press 1, it stops, 2, it starts, 1 to stop, and then 3 to reset. Perfect. Okay, so if you've managed to follow along there, that's our first network. That's everything we had at the beginning of the tutorial. I'll see if I can come up with some other ideas for you to copy, or if there's anything you want to try out. The main thing you've got to play around with here is you're just looking at ways to put numbers in here, however you can think of doing that. And so hopefully you can rebuild this yourself. You can either start experimenting with it, making sure that the numbers go in here at a reasonable range, and that what you see on the screen looks like something that the robot sort of can do safely. And I'll see if we can come up with some other ideas for ways that you might play around. Okay, thanks guys. Bye-bye.